Thank you, everybody. Thanks for that lovely introduction. Banned in Texas, banned in Russia, but I'm making it here in J Street in Washington, D.C. So I know J Street got its name because there is literally no J Street in Washington. And so the idea was to supply an important point of view that was missing in the political dialogue. And it's good to know that there is a J Street in Washington today. So hello to everybody. Hello to my constituent and my friend Jeremy Ben-Ami. Hello to Ambassador Alan Salamat, my colleague and friend. Hello to anybody out there from Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District. I know I've got some friends I think are out there. I know David Goodfriend and Susan Emmers are out there someplace, and Jill Chesson and Dana Beyer, Simon Clark. Hello to my friends and interns from New Story Leadership, Iran Nissan and Carolyn Mays, I think you're here. And hello to all you pro-Israel, pro-peace, and pro-democracy activists from all over America. I'm thrilled to be your first keynote speaker since they unveiled this captivating tripartite new tagline for J Street, the political home for pro-Israel, pro-peace, and pro-democracy Americans. And I wouldn't go so far as to speculate that you altered your motto on my behalf personally, but I know that you know what it means to be pro-Israel and pro-peace, and I want to just discuss for my time with you tonight what it means to be a pro-democracy American in 2022 in a rather frightful world where so many people have turned to propaganda and conspiracy theory and disinformation and fanaticism and authoritarianism. Now, because I'm here as a true blue Democrat, but you are obviously a scrupulously nonpartisan entity, I wanted to begin my speech on a bipartisan note by invoking our last great Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, who spoke of government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that has always been the tantalizing ideal of American politics and government, but it's of course not how we began. We started as a slave republic of Christian white male property owners over the age of 21, and it has only been through successive waves of political and moral and social and constitutional struggle that we have come in sight of Lincoln's beautiful, elusive ideal and grown ever closer to the dream of a more perfect union. The starting point for pro-democracy Americans is the recognition that America is a striving and evolving democracy. As all democracies are. Democracy is a journey, but it has a clear meaning. Sometimes my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will attempt to rebut the critics of the January 6th insurrection and Trump's attempted coup by smugly declaring, no, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. And then they give each other high fives as if they've just landed some kind of clever knockout rhetorical blow against the movement of democracy in America. This is obviously a silly word game. A republic is just a representative democracy rather than a direct participatory democracy like Athens, which was a participatory democracy for its citizens, although not for its slaves or its women. In America, we are a former slave republic that has grown steadily more democratic and more universally inclusionary from the start because of the commitment of the people to political struggle to create a more perfect union. If you read the Constitution the way that I read it, the vast majority of the 17 constitutional amendments we've added since the original Bill of Rights were democratizing amendments to expand the inclusion of the nation, to expand participation and voting rights for the people, expanding suffrage, for all Americans. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment gave us equal protection and due process. The 15th Amendment banned discrimination in voting based on race. The 17th Amendment shifted the mode of election of U.S. senators from the legislatures to the people. The 19th Amendment doubled the franchise in America by giving us women's suffrage. The 23rd Amendment gave people here in Washington, D.C. the right to participate in presidential elections. The 24th Amendment banned poll taxes. And the 26th Amendment lowered the voting age in America to 18. The whole trajectory of American political and constitutional development has been in the direction of greater democracy, greater inclusion, and greater participation for all of the people of the United States, and we must keep going. When Tocqueville came to America and wrote Democracy in America, he observed that in our country, voting rights and democracy are always either shrinking and contracting, or they're expanding and growing. And we've been in a pretty brutal contractionary and shrinking mode, even to the point of democracy having to contend with violent insurrection to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power, attempted coups to overthrow a presidential election, electoral sabotage, and political violence. We must put American democracy back on the growth track in America. For example, there are 713,000 tax-paying, draftable American citizens living in the city where you are sitting tonight who are the only residents of a national capital on the planet Earth who are not represented in their own legislature. It's time for D.C. statehood in the United States of America. It is time for statehood. And I'm proud that we have now twice voted for statehood in the House of Representatives. I had the honor of being one of the floor leaders with D.C.'s delegate, Eleanor Holmes Norton, bringing that legislation to the floor. And when I got up, I thanked the people of Washington who have a real, valid, legitimate, honest-to-goodness political grievance in America, not a phony, counterfeit, made-up, fake news grievance. But they didn't come down and beat the hell out of our police officers and hit them over their head with Confederate battle flags. The people of Washington have done it the right way. They've petitioned for statehood, and we must grant them admission to the Union. And we got 3.5 million American citizens living in Puerto Rico who learned the bitter price and the bitter taste of colonial disenfranchisement with Hurricane Maria, where they got cheated out of hundreds of millions of dollars of aid, and Donald Trump threw some paper towels at them. It's time to make Puerto Rico a state in the Union. It's time to end the gerrymandering of our state legislative districts and our federal districts. It's time. It's time to call off the filibuster, which is not in the Constitution, which is not in federal law, which is a mere rule of the Senate, already with more than 100 exceptions to it for the balanced budget, for the Budget Reconciliation Act, for the Trade Adjustment Act, for judicial nominations. How about an exception to the filibuster for voting rights and democracy in America? How about an exception for reproductive freedom in America, supported by the vast majority of the American people? How about an exception for a universal violent criminal background check before people buy firearms, supported by more than 90% of the American people? It's time for us to start electing the President of the United States the way we elect governors, senators, mayors, representatives, and everybody else. Whoever gets the most votes wins. How about that radical democratic notion. It's time for the national popular vote. Interstate compact. We've got to pass that, and we've got to get it done. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year sending people abroad to teach people how we do democracy and elections in America. And you know, one thing they never come back with when they're writing these new constitutions, they never say, hey, you know that electoral college thing you got going on? That work really well over here. No, let's learn from the rest of the world. Let's learn from our own elections. Let's pass a majority vote for the President of the United States. My friends, we've got a robust and urgent democracy agenda in America, which is not only to defend our institutions against violence and chaos and vendetta, but to go on the offense, to expand and reform democratic institutions, admitting new states, passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, passing the We the People Act, passing a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to vote to every American citizen. So people don't have to go out every 2 years and just fight for their right to register, fight for the right to vote, fight for the right to get their vote counted. Come on, let's catch up with the rest of the world and give people a constitutional right to vote in the country. My friends, we're in the fight of our lives to defend and expand democracy against its enemies, because democracy is always an unfinished project. It's always a work in progress. And we must save democracy in order to successfully confront climate change and save our species' survival on Earth. This is the civilizational threat that the autocrats, the kleptocrats, and theocrats will never face for us. It will have to be small d Democrats all over the world who save us from climate change. Now, I want to get one thing off of my chest. Because I know that you are a scrupulously nonpartisan entity, and I am a partisan politician. But I've got to tell you this story because I go to my committees, I'll go to the Oversight Committee, I'll go to the Judiciary Committee, I'll go to the Rules Committee, and some of my friends across the aisle have a very difficult time correctly pronouncing the name of my political party in its adjectival form. They will say, well, that Democrat Congresswoman with her Democrat bill and her Democrat amendment. And for 6 years, I have tried gently to explain to them, no, when it's an adjective, you have to say the Democratic Congresswoman, the Democratic bill, the Democratic amendment. You know, but they kept doing it. And I think it was about a month ago, and I was in committee, and somebody did it, and I exploded. And I said, you know, you guys have this self-imposed political speech impediment. All right? And now it's spreading over to my side. It's contagious because every time I try to open my mouth to correctly say the name of your party, it comes out the banana Republican congressman and the banana Republican bill and the banana Republican amendment. And I went home and I told my wife and I said, you know, finally I got them back. And she said, Sarah said, that was an extremely immature response. So then I had to come up with something else. But fortunately, I was reading this great book I recommend highly to you about Franklin D. Roosevelt called Traitor to His Class. H.W. Brand is the author. And I learned something remarkable from that book, which is that Roosevelt did not call my party the Democratic Party, much less the Democrat Party. You know what he called us? He called us the democracy. The democracy. And it's something he got from Andrew Jackson, who called us the democracy. So Roosevelt would have a speech where he'd say, well, the plutocrats and the royalists say you invest in the very wealthiest people in society. Some of the wealth will dribble down on everybody else. But the democracy says invest in the great American middle class and everybody will rise and prosper together. That's the doctrine of the democracy, said Roosevelt. So now when my friends can't pronounce the name of our party, I just say to them, hey, just do what Roosevelt did, call us the democracy, because these days, that's what we are, okay? We've got two major political parties in the country. One of them is committed to respecting the results of free and fair elections. One of them is upholding and defending the Constitution and the civil rights and the civil liberties of the people. And if, and I take no joy in saying that, I've got a bust of Abraham Lincoln on my desk that I inherited from my grandfather, and Lincoln is my favorite. But the party of Lincoln, I'm afraid, has become the authoritarian cult of Donald Trump. And everybody got on President Biden's case when he made his speech, and he said that he detected semi-fascist currents within the Republican Party. And they all denounced him for it. Well, the political scientists and the historians tell us that the hallmarks of a fascist or authoritarian political party are that they are organized as a cult of personality around a charismatic or allegedly charismatic leader. They refuse to accept the results of a democratic election if they don't go their way, and they embrace or refuse to denounce political violence as an instrument of their achieving political power. So if the shoe semi-fits, you semi-wear it, okay? President Biden was not mistaken when he said that. Now, Trump and his followers have released and supercharged in America the worst monsters from the last century: fascism and racism and anti-Semitism, misogyny, political violence, authoritarianism. Trump now dines in with neo-Nazis and Holocaust revisionists. And isn't it fascinating that these are always the same people? The people who deny the reality of the Holocaust in the last century are the same people driving towards another Holocaust in this century. And if you don't want to dine with anti-Semites accidentally, then don't dine with their anti-Semitic friends on purpose. Resurgent fascist politics is a problem all over the world today. And while the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the QAnon networks, and the militia groups promote insurrectionist ideology and paranoid conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement Theory, and while they activate violent fanatics all over America, Steve Bannon is promoting the creation of right-wing authoritarian ethno-states all over the world. And the bullies and dictators have found each other. Putin in Russia, Orban in Hungary, El-Sisi in Egypt, Marcos in the Philippines, Erdogan in Turkey, Xi in China, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Donald Trump in Florida, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. From the autocrats in Moscow to the kleptocrats in Mar-a-Lago to the theocrats in Saudi Arabia and Iran, the enemies of democracy are on the march, and they are coordinating an attack on democratic institutions and freedom everywhere on earth, but especially in America, which has been a key source of democratic inspiration and strength to people all over the world. And so I don't mean to put unbearable pressure on this group, which has a lot of work to do anyway, but the struggle to defend democracy in America is the struggle to defend democracy and human rights on earth today. And Tom Paine knew this. When Tom Paine got here in 1774, 2 years before he would come to write Common Sense, 2 years before the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution beginning, Paine looked around and he traveled and he fell in love with the promise of America. With his eyes wide open about the problems here, he joined the first abolitionist society, which Ben Franklin created in Philadelphia. He argued for women's right to vote in the 1770s, but he saw in America the possibility of creating the world's first democracy, overthrowing centuries of despotism, of the kings and the queens, and the merger of church and state, and tyranny over human beings and human thought and scientific investigation. Paine said America would become an asylum to humanity. Not an insane asylum, mind you, but a place of refuge for people fleeing from political and religious and economic persecution all over the world. The persecuted lovers of freedom, he said, would find a place here in America. And when America realized its destiny as the first democracy, he said, then the cause of America will become the cause of all mankind, of all humanity. That's the America we're fighting for today. And J Street, you are an important part of the American forces of democracy and freedom today, and you must stand strong and fight hard against the primitive impulses that have been unleashed against freedom all over the world. Democracy, human rights, and national sovereignty are all under attack in Ukraine, where Putin's filthy and bloody imperialist invasion has already produced numerous atrocities and war crimes and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. The struggle to defend Ukraine is the democratic world's frontline defense against fascist tyranny, and it is the opportunity for us to mobilize support for the principles of democratic freedom all over the world. But just as there is a furious struggle between democratic nations and tyrannical regimes, there is a profound struggle taking place within each society at the same time. Even in Russia, tens of thousands of brave Russians in the Russian anti-war and human rights movement have stood up valiantly against Putin's war machine, his propaganda, and his censorship to demand truth and progress and real democracy in their country. These people are Russians too, and they represent Russia's democratic future. Here in America, we've got our hands full with a right-wing authoritarian movement positioned outside of the constitutional order, which uses propaganda, incitement, anti-Semitism and racism, and political violence to undermine, crush, and overwhelm democratic institutions. The former president, clinging to his pathological insistence that he won the 2020 election, which the U.S. Congress and every court in the land to look at it confirms that he lost, now openly calls, this is today, for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution, he said, in order to overturn the massive fraud of the 2020 election. What a dangerous derangement this is. But my friends, bucking all the pundit predictions and decades of political history, the American people have put the Senate back in the hands of the democracy, and we have overcome gerrymandering and voter suppression and right-wing propaganda to give Kevin McCarthy and the GOP a stunningly narrow House margin in this off-presidential year election. Deflecting from his historic underperformance, McCarthy said that House Speaker gavels don't come in small, medium, and large sizes, but you know they do seem to come in extra tiny sizes, and that's the one he's got now, assuming he can find a way to get to 218 on the House floor. In Iran, while its repressive rulers arm Trump's hero and bosom buddy, Vladimir Putin, and his army with military drones for its murderous assault on Ukraine, at home, the ruling mullahs and savage morality police are working to crush an awesomely inspiring Iranian freedom movement led by women and girls against the hijab, the compulsory hijab, and the regime of misogynistic repression that Iranian women experience every day. We must support the forces of freedom and equality in Iran in their quest to build a new free society on new principles against the theocrats and the autocrats. In Israel, the political forces defending democracy, equal rights, and freedom under law, and the peace process must now contend with a surging far-right alliance in the Knesset, which is poised to contribute numerous members to Netanyahu's new cabinet. There's, for example, the controversial Bezalel Smotrich, the ultra-right-wing lawyer who wants Israel to be governed theocratically under the laws of the Torah, and openly calls for annexation of the West Bank, which would destroy the prospect of a two-state solution that has been a basic commitment of American foreign policy for decades. There's Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's earned multiple criminal convictions in Israel for racist incitement and support for a terrorist group, and yet is now poised to become Israel's new national security minister. A follower of Rabbi Kahana, who threatened Prime Minister Rabin just weeks before his assassination, Ben-Gvir stole the emblem off of Rabin's car and proclaimed, "We got to his car and we'll get to him too." The inclusion of political extremists in the government of a democratic society, as we have seen recently here in the Trump administration, constitutes a clear and present danger to democratic values, the rule of law, and human rights. My friends, there is a struggle going on today within every society and every nation on earth between the forces of authoritarianism and fanaticism and intolerance and the demands of inclusion, democratic freedom and civil rights and civil liberties and human rights. There's a struggle today within humanity to make civilization real. As champions of the Enlightenment values, it's our job to lend support to movements and people everywhere seeking to defend democracy and human rights and the rule of law in the prospect of peace and mutual security among all nations and peoples. Every nation on earth has an inviolable right to territorial integrity and security against military aggression, from Ukraine to Israel to Tibet to Taiwan. That's a principle we must defend strongly at the same time that we back the values of democracy and freedom and human rights all over the world. These are tough times for our people everywhere, and especially young people. And I'm so glad that J Street is reaching out to young people and providing them a foundation in basic moral and political principles in a spirit of optimism grounded in hope. My dad used to tell us when we were kids, when everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. You're the hope. And I want the young people here today and out in America not to lose hope, not to lose optimism. I like to tell them a story about when I first ran for office. I ran for the state Senate in Maryland against a 32-year incumbent who was the president pro tem of the state Senate. And my favorite story about it is our local paper, the Montgomery Journal, had an article in it quoting a pundit who said, "Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible." And 9 months later, we got 67% of the vote. And then the Washington Post had an article quoting a pundit who said Raskin's victory was inevitable. Okay? So we went from impossible to inevitable in 9 months because the pundits are never wrong. But I want to tell the young people, in politics, nothing is impossible and nothing is inevitable. It is only possible through the democratic arts of education, organizing and mobilizing people to make change. It is possible with your passion and your activism. You can make it happen. I want to thank you, J Street, for providing a lot of hope for America, for Israel, for democracy, and for peace on earth. And I'll leave you with the words of two great democracy patriots I've held close to my heart through the tough times we've lived. And one of them comes from Maryland, it won't surprise you, the great Frederick Douglass, who was born about 45 minutes away from here on the Wye River plantation into slavery. And he escaped from slavery to become a great freedom fighter through the Civil War and through Reconstruction. And he said, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. And the struggle may be moral, it may be physical, it may be moral and physical together, but there must be struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. A message to you from the people of Maryland in the 19th century. And I'll close with the words of the great Tom Paine. And there's still no statue of Tom Paine here in Washington, but if my legislation goes all the way through, there will be a statue of Tom Paine, and it's got a universal bipartisan recommendation from the Historic Architectural Review Commission. But anyway, in 1776, it was a tough time. They said that you ultimately can't beat kings and queens and tyrants. You can't beat theocrats. You can't unleash a reign of democracy and freedom and equality for people. And Paine and the American Revolutionaries said, you can. We can do it. But it was a tough time, because all of the liberal and democratic forces were walking around saying, what's the message and who's the messenger, and we got to get organized and all that. And Tom Paine wanted to write a pamphlet to give people a sense of hope and courage, and he wrote this pamphlet called The Crisis. I just want to quote a little passage for you, and I'm going to update the language pursuant to instructions from Speaker Pelosi, so it doesn't offend modern sensibilities. And she said Tom Paine was a feminist, and that he was, so he wouldn't mind. But he wrote in The Crisis, he said, these are the times that try men and women's souls. These are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country, but everyone that stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory. Let's make that victory ours. Thank you, J Street. Thank you.